You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network. This is the Thunderquack Podcast, the official podcast of Thunderquack Podcast Network, where anything can happen. So strap yourselves in and hold on to your butts. It's Thunderquack time!
Hello and welcome to the Ant-Man and the Wasp Thunderquack Spoilercast. I am one of your hosts, Michael Cohen, and joining me for this Spoilercast, I've got my co-host from, formerly from the Pullbox Podcast and currently from Disney Dad's Cartoon Afternoon, Kurtis Findlay.
Hi, everyone.
And we are going to get into Ant-Man and the Wasp, which just came out last week. And we're gonna spoil the Pym particles out of this one. So you've been warned. We're gonna get into it, and nothing is off the table. It's all fair game. We're gonna go through what we loved about it, maybe some of the stuff that we can nitpick. Although, in my opinion, there's not too much. And of course, we've got Kurtis here, so we're gonna be able to ask him for some of the deep cuts, hopefully.
Sure, yeah, I got some Easter eggs for you for sure. So.
And then we're going to talk about that post-credit scene for sure. And then,
what? There was a post-credit scene?
Oh,
should
no,
I stayed
through
the credits? Oh man,
there's two. And then we'll figure out where we think this sits in our own personal rankings. And one of these days, I think we're going to do an official Thunderquack ranking. The thing with that is that anybody who follows me knows that I'm a big fan of Kinda Funny and Greg Miller in particular. And over at Kinda Funny, they did MCU in review. And I followed along with them as they went through and rewatched every MCU film. And I put together my own personal rankings, which are purely subjective and kind of the moment. And even just looking back through them before we started recording, I'm like, I don't know if I feel the way that I felt when I arranged this list. But I want to do an MCU ranking, but I want to do it based on some criteria. And I want to put together, what I want to do is I basically want to take what they did and I want to improve on the model by having an actual scoring system that we track. So, and like we would probably start with the Star Wars franchise where we go through all of the Star Wars movies and officially rank them so that we would have our own personal rankings, and then we would do an amalgam ranking, and that would be the official Thunderquack one. And I would assemble teams for each of these things. So when we do the Star Wars one, it'll be myself, Matt, Tim, Kyle, Paul, right? Because we're the Star Wars podcasters on the network. When we do MCU, it would be you and me, and we'd probably bring Tim into that one as well because he's a big MCU and Marvel guy, right? And we'll like form these teams to do these official rankings, and then jump back in when we do these spoiler casts, and then we kind of know who's going to be on the spoiler cast for the most part. But that's a little bit of behind the scenes. And sort of what I'm thinking. You guys let me know if you think that would be something you'd be into hearing about. I'm looking for something new to do with the exclusives especially. So anybody out there who follows us on Patreon and wants to give me the heads up, you can do that over there. Or on Facebook, whatever. But let's get into our spoiler cast, our no holds barred spoiler cast for Ant-Man and the Wasp. Start off with this. What did you think, Kurtis?
Just in general?
Just in general, yeah. What was your impression coming out of the theater?
I loved it. I had a great time.
Yep.
I had no problems with this. It was fun. It was funny. It was a welcome breath of fresh air after a super intense, heavy previous MCU movie. So I was just like, it was great.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It was so much fun. laughs from top to bottom. I mean, I think that Peyton Reed took the great stuff from the first one and looked at the pace of like a Thor Ragnarok or a Guardians of the Galaxy and did that without becoming one of those movies, because those movies have a very different tone. But keeping it grounded, keeping it on Earth, keeping it, although, you know, we go into the quantum realm and all that sort of thing.
That's still technically on Earth.
It is still technically on Earth. Although, I mean, like, we'll get into that. We're going to get into that.
Yeah, we will get into that.
But, yeah, I mean, like, it had the pace and comedic timing of one of the Guardians movies or of Thor Ragnarok, but like I said, with that grounded element to it, which for my money actually kind of makes it a little bit better. I think it's a little bit, don't get me wrong, because I love the cosmic, you know, sci-fi comedy stuff that they've done in the MCU, but yeah, there's just, I don't know. There's just something about Paul Rudd and about playing within those rules of being on Earth, sort of within the larger MCU, an active participant in it, and still having to play by their rules, but being as ridiculous and fun as they can manage. And I don't know, I really felt like they doubled down on the stuff that was great from the first movie, and they added in so much more to it, and it just had such a great sci-fi vibe to it, that the first one to me was much more focused on the heist thief aspect.
Now, I wonder if that was if that's just the difference also between like Edgar Wright and Peyton Reed. Now, I can't remember. Did Edgar Wright actually direct any of the first movie before he was let go? Okay,
no,
but he was involved in the script writing process.
He was involved in the screenwriting, in breaking the story, but I believe that there were some pretty significant changes from what he wanted to do.
But if you laid the initial groundwork, like the whole heist thing definitely feels more in line with something that Edgar Wright would do, knowing the films that he's done. But yeah, you're right. This one was way more sci-fi, and I just sat there listening to all of their absolutely ridiculous techno mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
And the completely insane things that they're building, and like this is like giving Tony Stark a run for his money with all of the stuff that they're doing here. It was so sci-fi, way more sci-fi than Iron Man ever gets.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I think with Iron Man, although the tech is built on science fiction foundation, Tony's a mechanic. It's a hot rod car, right? It's ultimately very easy to understand. It's a tank that he wears.
Yeah, because he's a weapons manufacturer.
Yeah. So it's much more accessible, I think.
Yeah.
And then when you get into Hank Pym and his world, you're talking about quantum mechanics, and you're talking about physics and all of these aspects of science, true science, and not just mechanical engineering, which is the majority of what we're dealing with Tony Stark. Not to say that, like, I mean, like, obviously in Avengers he's dealing with the gamma radiation, whatever, and he's pretty up on everything, but you fall back on, I mean, like, go back to Iron Man 3, he's the mechanic, right? So it's about fixing things. That's his character. Would
you say that Hank and Hope are smarter than Tony?
I don't think so. I mean, like, I think this is one of the things about Tony Stark, is that Hank Pym is a genius level intellect, and he's like a super genius level intellect because he's a superhero. So it's one of his superpowers, right? It's people go like, oh, these characters without they're not without superpowers. Their intelligence is a superpower.
Yeah.
But Tony Stark is up there with the most brilliant minds in the in the Marvel universe, in the comics. He is
Yep.
one of those Illuminati types of characters. He's not in the Illuminati, is he?
Yes, he is.
Is
Yeah.
he? Okay.
Hank's not though.
No, Hank's not. So like Hank is a genius in his realm, and the Pym particle and physics and the quantum realm and all of that stuff. That is his arena. The thing about Tony Stark is that Tony sees a piece of tech, he sees science, and he almost instantly understands it. And there's there's a few characters like that in the Marvel universe. There's Tony Stark, there's Reed Richards, there's Victor Von Doom, right? Like there are a handful of characters. Forge, although it's technically his mutant power, so
Right,
that's
yeah.
kind of a weird one. But and even Peter Parker. And that's one of the things that I loved about the recent Parker Industries storyline of Spider-Man, because it went into the fact that like, oh yeah, Peter Parker's as smart as Tony Stark. He just didn't have resources and never applied himself in that way because he was always busy with his personal issues, right? So Doc Ock builds up this corporation for him, and all of a sudden he can change the world and become Tony Stark. But yeah, Hank Pym is operating on an equal level when they're in the same arena. But I think that the thing about Tony Stark or Reed Richards is that they're polymaths, right? Like they are able to adapt to any situation and learn any science or tech that they need to in order to save the day. Hank McCoy is another one that like.
So you think that Hank Pym can't do that?
I don't think that we've ever really seen that from the character. I think that, like, because I would put him with like Bruce Banner, right? Bruce Banner he's a gamma.
He's a specialist.
Specialist, yeah. Like he is the foremost expert on gamma radiation and radiation in general, as well as biological engineering and sort of like that side of things. But put him next to his, I mean, like one of the great moments in the MCU is you get to the end of Iron Man 3 and it turns out that he's been telling the story to Bruce Banner, and he's like, look, I'm not that kind of doctor. I don't have the training. And it's like, he is like self-admitted that he's not necessarily, the kind of polymath that a guy like Tony is. I think that
Bruce Banner also doesn't have very much confidence in himself, so he might not even say it, even if he is.
So that's a similar to Peter Parker's situation. But I think that Hank would be intimidated, and I would lash out at some of these other geniuses in the MCU if he were in the same room, and I think it's one of the reasons why they keep them separate. Because I think like if you put him in an Avengers movie and he had to deal with Tony Stark, you would spend half of the movie with the two of them just arguing about which one of them is smarter, and you wouldn't get anything done. I mean, we see a little bit of that sort of thing with Bill Foster in this movie. The great line, one of my favorite moments in the entire movie is when he's explaining that we could go to Bill Foster, but we had a bit of a falling out, and then Lewis is like, oh, you seem to have a falling out with a lot of people. It's like, Hank's not exactly, and I love it because it's that reinterpretation from the comics of Hank was never, I mean, obviously in the Silver Age stuff, none of them have real personalities, right? They're all just, their personality is whatever their specialty is, right?
Yeah.
But as you get into the 80s and the 90s,
or even the 70s.
Or even the 70s, it's true. Hank Pym starts to become this other type of character, and he becomes a very standoffish, very bullheaded, and then eventually an abusive character, and not really much of a hero. And that's sort of the Ant-Man staple, right? That's sort of like, in order to become the Ant-Man, you have to have two things. You have to be able to shrink, and you have to be a bad person. Like you have to kind of have these really, really deep character flaws, because you've got the three main Ant-Men. You've got Hank Pym, like I said, ultimately becomes an abuser. He abuses Janet Van Dyne in the comics, and then you've got Scott Lang, who's a thief, who obviously turns it around and becomes a hero, and that's what we see in the movies as well. But then you've also got Eric O'Grady, the irredeemable Ant-Man, who is never at any point in time. I mean, he's the irredeemable Ant-Man. He does heroic things, but almost in spite of himself. And my biggest hope for the third Ant-Man movie, which I hope that they make one, and I think based on this one doing pretty well, that's kind of in the cards.
I think so.
If they I really hope that what we see is Ant-Man, Scott Lang sort of, and even Hank Pym working with whatever the new version of S.H.I.E.L.D. ends up being, and that sort of thing. And then eventually Eric O'Grady in the next Ant-Man movie steals the Ant-Man suit, and that's the majority of the adventure, and you've got Scott Lang kind of trying to go after him. And Hank sort of starts to take a little bit of a backseat in the story. And I think, I mean, like Michael Douglas is getting older, and this movie, it's very evident that he's getting older, and I don't know that he's especially in some of the interviews and stuff like that, he's very it's starting to show, and so I think that they'll probably start to I don't think that they would get rid of him, but I think like maybe move him into the background a little bit more and let some of the other characters take on that role. But yeah, sure. That's my greatest hope for the Ant-Man franchise, because I love Irredeemable Ant-Man. It is one of my favorite I like modern takes on a character, sort of like modern reimaginings of a classic character, getting in there with him, and he steals the suit, and he does it basically to get chicks and make money. And he's just a terrible human being, but very funny. So I think that they could have a lot of fun with that if they eventually get there. Fine, like I love the arc of Scott Lang, really like learning what it means to be a superhero and to be the Ant-Man, and balance life and his family and all that stuff. And I want to see him get there, right? Like I want to see, after whatever happens in the next Infinity War and the hero status quo is reinstated, and the Sokovia Accords aren't something that we're so concerned with, that we can have a character like Scott Lang start to take a mentorship role instead of being sort of the butt of the joke like he has been for his 3 appearances. And I feel like where we leave him at the end of this movie, he's sort of set up for that. That he's learned some lessons, and he's grown as a person, and I think he's ready for that. We're kind of talking all over the place and tangenting quite a bit, but what were some of your favorite moments in the movie?
Definite highlight was the car chase at the very end there.
Yeah.
What a fantastic car chase, and just the choreography that goes into this. They had such a good use of using shrinking and growing in combat really effectively. And I think of like the time when when Hope is like she flies through a windshield as the Wasp, and instantly grows when she's on the inside and takes some people, and then flies out the window, and then grows big as she's coming over the side and hops in through the other window. And it's just stuff like that was just fantastic. And then the comedy of it as well, Ant-Man using the flatbed truck as like a go-kart, a little scooter or something. And the cars that change shape and size, and it's just it was so well done and a lot of fun. That was definitely a big highlight for me. Loved it.
Yeah, I mean, anytime we got an action sequence where we got Ant-Man and the Wasp working together, and the juxtaposition of their two different styles.
Yeah.
It was just always great because Scott Lang is very much like fly by the seat of his pants. He's making it up as he goes, and with the regulator malfunctioning and him shrinking and growing against his will, added a great element to it to keep him, even though he's trained and he's gotten better at being Ant-Man, it keeps him in the rookie position. And then you've got Hope just completely owning it and just destroying as the Wasp, and she's really kind of unstoppable. And I love that. I love that dynamic. I love it for a bunch of reasons. And then I guess I should say, first and foremost, that it just exemplifies their characters so much. It's and I think this is probably what the MCU does better than any other superhero on screen, whether it's TV, movies, or even in most animation. The personalities that they infuse these characters with and the casting choices that they make, it comes out in fight choreography and action sequences and the choices that the characters make, to the point that like they are defined not just by their dialogue or their performance, but also by these centerpieces and action set pieces throughout their movies, right? And the way that Hope fights is all a part of the fact that she is she's focused, she's determined, and she's powerful, right? And then you juxtapose that with Scott Lang's Ant-Man, as I said, who's just like
bumbling his way through things.
So slapdash, just happenstance. But the great thing about Scott Lang is that nothing's ever a barrier that's big enough or small enough to stop him. He just rolls with it, right? He's stuck in giant man form, so what does he do? He takes the truck and he just puts it into neutral and he skateboards with it, right? Like it's just that versatility of that character comes through, and the ingenuity and the cleverness and intelligence of Hope's character comes through in the way that she fights. And when you think about the way that Thor fights in Ragnarok and the way that the Hulk fights in his appearances and Captain America and Iron Man, it's like that's what they're doing with the action to keep us engaged and to actually further story while giving us great action sequences. If you juxtapose that against let's say Justice League, what's the signature of Aquaman's personality in the way that he fights, or Batman, or Superman, or Cyborg, or Wonder Woman? I mean, like Wonder Woman is maybe the most defined in the sense that she has this thing where she slams her wrists together and it makes a force bubble, and that's it. That's the only thing that I can think of in those movies to really define any of those characters visually in the way that they fight and their fighting style. It's like it just shows that the surface level of those characters versus the depth of the characters in the MCU and the way that they're presented. And it's the difference between a great movie and a movie that has some cool parts in it, right? Like that's the thing that the MCU is doing to me, is that they don't let you forget who your characters are.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, the casting is just so spot on. It's so solid. And at this point, they really just kind of have the pick of the litter. They don't have to. It's just a thing. Like it's like, oh, you're finally in a Marvel movie, right? Like, oh yeah, like any actor of note eventually makes their way into these things over the last few years, unless you have a conflicting character in another studio, right? It's like Jennifer Lawrence hasn't shown up in an MCU movie because unfortunately she's the main character in all of the first class subgenre of X-Men movies, right? So like otherwise,
you mean the continuing franchise, because Michael B. Jordan is in Fantastic Four and
absolutely,
Black Panther.
yeah. When they go belly up, they make the swap. Yeah, but yeah, as long as it's a viable franchise, which unfortunately those X-Men movies seem to still be. Don't worry, I think Dark Phoenix will put the nail in that coffin. But
well, we've been saying that about every movie.
It's true. I don't know. I am okay. I'll clarify.
We're getting
on that.
way off track here.
I'm just gonna say I think X-Men Apocalypse was the nail in the coffin, and I think that Phoenix is gonna play that out, because there's a lot of people who aren't gonna go see that movie because of the bad taste that they've got in their mouth from Apocalypse. Which that's a perfect example of like Oscar Isaac isn't in any MCU movies because he was in that, and that's a travesty because he needs to be in the MCU somewhere.
Yeah.
But okay, so we're talking about favorite moments, right? So
what's your favorite moment?
Everything in the quantum realm, when you start getting into that, and Hank goes down in the ship, and you've got that awesome reference to Fantastic Voyage by him being in the shrinking ship. The stuff with the tardigrades, the water bears, it's such a great.
Those are beautiful.
It
was really nice.
I saw the movie twice. I saw it in IMAX, and then I saw it in regular 3D, and both times, but especially in IMAX, that moment when he gets down there and he has his line, which is one of my favorite lines in the movie, where he's like, "Scott, you never said how beautiful it was," right? And it's like it's just. Again, it's a great character moment because it's the difference between Scott, who it happens because of sort of happenstance, and he's got to do it in order to save the day, sort of thing, and he ends up there by accident, and it's a thing where it's like, okay, I'm here, I got to get out of this. But then Hank, who like this is his life's work, and he gets to finally see what he's been theorizing this whole time. He gets there and it's like, oh my God, this is everything I dreamed and more. And he's not even in the quantum realm yet. He's just really small. And then and then it immediately turns from this moment of great beauty to, oh, this is dangerous. Like there's this great element of danger that like, he's going to be fine. It doesn't really ratchet up the stakes at all, but it is still just such a great cherry on top of that moment of like, okay, he stops, he gets to have his moment. It's sort of a great, well, what the hell are they doing up there? Recalibrate and then go. It's just sort of like a little interlude, and I loved that. And then you get into the quantum realm, and you discover that the quantum realm is something more than just small, right? There is something there, and especially the elements of the quantum realm where it's like, because Scott gets there, he's able to entangle with Janet, and she's able to basically control him.
That was one of my other favorite moments.
And it's just it's so clever, and it's so much fun, and it's another element that builds on top of everything else that's come before it in the MCU. And it's like it's this moment within an Ant-Man movie where we have this brief connection to Doctor Strange, where you're like, it's the quantum realm. It's not you're quantum sized. You get so small that you're able to actually break through physical reality into a quantum reality. And that's exactly the sort of thing that Doctor Strange, like, that's what he peddles in. That's his deal, is the ability to break from one reality into another. Right. And so the idea that like, and we'll get to it, but Scott's stuck in the post-credit scene in the quantum realm, and it's like, oh, what are you going to do with him stuck in the quantum realm? How are they going to get him out? Well, there are all sorts of ways that we can solve this problem. Tony can build something, right? Like Shuri can discover the quantum tunnel and they can pull him out. Like any of these scientists can do some sort of science thing to help. But then we also have the mystical side of it where we can go, well, I mean, I don't know who's left, right? But if Wong is still around, there's no reason why they can't employ him to travel into the quantum realm and pull Scott out of there, right? Like, it's just another element of the MCU that's built on everything else, that now we have another tool in the tool belt that when you get to the next Avengers, or you get to whatever comes after that, or whatever crossovers you're going to do, it's like, okay, we can pull this out. We can use this, right? We can, now the quantum realm is something that we can mess with. You could do it in a Guardians of the Galaxy movie. You could do it in an Iron Man movie. You could do it in all sorts of different stories. You could have this other element at play, and they do it with the regular Marvel flair of like, check this out, it's so cool, it's visually distinct. And then the payoff of that, of finding Janet in the quantum realm, and her awesome outfit and that great reveal, and she's just totally badass, and now she's got an additional superpower because she's got quantum abilities.
That was really interesting, because that's something that's completely new for the movies. And basically because we don't need another Wasp, we have a Wasp already. So what do we do to make Jan new and different? Yeah. And I like the idea that because evolution happens on the smallest scale, like that's where the change happens. So if she goes down to being as small as the smallest molecules, then of course, she's going to mutate and change on a lot faster rate than people our size. So
one of the things that I took away from it, and that should mutants and the X-Men return to the MCU, if this purchase goes through, and which it seems like it's going to. I think it's been approved and everything. So when hopefully mutants return or arrive in the MCU, I really hope that they tie it into the events of Janet coming back. That, because the way that she talks about it, she uses the word evolution, and talks about it, it's kind of, sometimes it's gradual change, but sometimes it happens all at once. To me, it was almost them going like, this is our explanation. Right? This is how we're going to explain the X gene in the MCU. That's looking quite a far ahead on Marvel's part, because this movie would have had to been in process way before this possible deal. Yeah, unless they're just thinking, at some point we're going to get him back, so let's just kind of put this in here right now. I think that Kevin Feige is the kind of producer and working with Disney as long as he has, and as in depth as he has, and really, I mean, like he is the top producer at Disney right now, and Disney has some pretty high-powered producers because they make a lot of money between Marvel, Star Wars, and their own properties, right?
Yeah.
But Kevin Feige is the type of guy who's having conversations with Bob Iger where they're like, as soon as we're able to, we're purchasing that back. Whether we purchase back the X-Men rights by themselves, or we got to buy Fox to do it. Hook or crook, the only way that we get this thing to go another 10 years is if we can have Wolverine standing next to Spider-Man at some point.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
So I think that they had those conversations, and I think that because they've had those conversations, that Kevin Feige is going like, now how am I going to do it? Right? Like, how am I going to direct? He's the admiral, right? Like, each ship has its own captain, each movie is its own thing, but in order to have a fleet, you got to have an admiral, and that admiral's got to be able to call the shots for everybody. in order to effectively use all the pieces. And Kevin Feige was taking that very seriously. And I think that he is looking ahead, and the seeds that they planted to get to Avengers Infinity War were, in some instances 8 or 9 years in the making. And
but they always knew that could be a possibility,
yeah.
Whereas they don't know they didn't know if they'll ever get
sure
X-Men or
I think within the last couple of years they've had a pretty good sense of whether or not they'll be able to pull it off. And I do think that he is planting seeds throughout the MCU. And I think that it's entirely possible that if they can sign this deal before next May, that we will have a post-credits scene that's going to imply mutants are coming to the MCU.
So did you know that in the Ultimate Universe, Wasp is a mutant?
Well, there you go then.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that they could use quantum energy, like that idea of and retroactively what it'll do is it'll say, so Ghost was actually the first mutant that we saw on screen in the MCU. Retroactively, right? Because her powers are coming from this quantum energy. And her story is very much the story of a mutant, right? She's hit with these abilities, and she's young and unable to control them, and has to use technology in order to get a handle on these abilities. I mean, like, how similar is that to Havoc or Cyclops, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's Cyclops' story right there. Or I don't know, like Jean Grey's story is like that.
Yeah. So it's a great. I think that it's a really cool way to say, like, okay, what was the thing that was holding it back in the MCU version of the Marvel Universe, and have it be whatever they use to defeat Thanos. I don't know if defeat's the right word, but to undo what Thanos did. And I think the Infinity Stones will be involved in that, but I think that Scott getting trapped in the quantum realm is not by accident. That's going to be important in Avengers 4. And the fact that he's got a jar full of quantum energy, I think, is going to be very important.
Yeah.
It's like that is setting up a chess piece for a very important move in a year.
It's so infuriating that we have to wait. And
you know what though?
A cliffhanger that is.
It is, but it also isn't, because think about how long we used to have to wait. Think about how long it was between X-Men and X2. Think how long it was between Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2.
That's true.
And then
Spider-Man 3.
We get a
quarterly Marvel movie right now.
Yeah, we've got
Pretty
7
much.
months until 8 months until Captain
Miss
Marvel.
Or Captain Marvel. Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, that's such a long time, and we don't have a Star Wars movie in between to keep us happy. And I keep reminding people we do have Spider-Man Edge of, what is it? Edge of
Edge of Spider-Verse, yeah. But people aren't going to be satisfied with that one.
They're not,
so
but
different.
they should be, because that looks like it's going to be incredible.
Oh yeah, it looks fantastic.
Yeah,
but then we also have like the Netflix series that are coming out, and Shield will start up again in September, and like so. There's Marvel fans have
it's gonna be
pretty much things.
It's gonna be March
year.
before you know it, right? It's gonna be March before you know it, and then it's a real hop skip from March to May. But yeah, I mean, like it's funny how quickly we acclimate to things and how spoiled we get when we're like, 7 months for another Marvel movie.
Yeah,
and
it's true.
It's funny because the flip side of that conversation is, oh man, I'm getting superhero fatigue. It's like, no, you're not. You'll be at the next one. Shut your mouth. Yeah, I think that it's safe to say that a lot of people's one of their favorite moments from this movie is Luis doing his recaps. The truth serum really stuff. Good. The running gag of the truth serum.
This truth serum was so good.
I'll tell you, my favorite joke in the entire movie is Baba Yaga.
Yes.
Because it goes nowhere and it serves no purpose, but it gets so much attention. And it is just such a great joke, and such a great moment for that character, because it's like, because otherwise, like they they're just around, right? They're just kind of there, and they have a great moment towards the end of the movie as well when they tase the bad guys. But it's just so great because it's just a pure comedy moment of him like, have you ever heard of Baba Yaga? And then he's like singing the song, and they set it up as a Chekhov's gun, right? Like it's totally given the attention that sort of moment would be given if that then ends up being like, oh, and then that's how they solve the problem. That's how they defeat her is through this, folklore, right? But it's like,
no, that's not the case.
But it's not setting up anything. It's
well,
not.
It set up the final joke.
It's just a setup for a punchline down the road.
Yeah, right.
That is just totally throwaway, where he's just like, oh, Baba Yaga, and then he's just singing to himself.
Yeah,
and that's it. That's the whole thing. And I'm just like, that's why there's room for Ant-Man in the MCU. That's why there's room for this movie alongside everything else, because it's like it's a much smaller, much more personal story, and that's why it's a great palate cleanser before we get back into something epic with Captain Marvel. It's like, okay, let's slow it down. Let's just talk about these characters, catch up with where they are, so that we know in Avengers 4 what's up with Scott and what happened to everybody else. And give them their moment, but it's just like it's just like chill for a second. The whole world's not at stake. This is a very personal story. It's about ultimately it's about saving one human being, and then they end up also saving Ghost as well. And I don't know. I feel like the whole movie is just so tight.
Yeah. Well, I really liked the fact that they didn't have a villain in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a good move. There were antagonists for sure that were there to get in the way of the villains. I mean, of our heroes accomplishing their goals, but none of them were villains. Yeah. Not even the gangster guy. I can't remember his name now. But it was just really nice that you could have a well-crafted superhero story, and it didn't rely on the black and white good versus evil that we always see. They could do something different. And so having Ghost in here and having her be someone that actually needed help was really cool. I thought that was a great thing to do.
Sonny Birch was the played by
Sonny Birch,
Walton Goggins. It felt much more like a comic book story, because comic books often will have a story that like there's an objective and there are obstacles on the road to that objective, but it's not always Red Skull using the Tesseract to take over Europe. It's not always Doctor Doom declaring war on the Fantastic Four, right? Like sometimes it is just a simple rescue operation, and some other people get in the way, and everybody's got their motivations, and they're all true to their motivations throughout the movie, and sometimes those are at odds, and sometimes they work together, and that makes for an interesting dynamic story. And I think that's one of the best things I can say about this movie, is that like you're never at any point going like, okay, let's get to the next part. You're always invested in each of, because there really are sort of three plots that are all intertwined, right? And actually probably like four, because you've got,
I was gonna say five even.
Okay.
Let's see. So there's the Rescue Jan story. There's the Ghost story. Mm-hmm. There is the FBI trying to get Pym and Jan story.
Yeah.
There is the maybe I'm tapping out here.
Well, and then the Scott's story of sort of like the reluctant hero.
Right. Oh yeah, of
aspect,
course. Yeah.
Right?
Scott's
trying
story,
to do right by his family.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
And there's one more I was thinking.
Oh, and the ex-cons.
Oh yeah, of course.
Right, like
Yeah,
that's another plot thread as well,
Sure.
right? So yeah, like when we touch in on each of their storylines, it's always because we want to. It never feels forced or like, oh, like here's a scene for some exposition. It's like the great moment with Ghost and Bill Foster where she's like, we've got to do something to get them back, so there's like we have to manipulate this situation somehow. He has a daughter, we can do that, and that great back and
that was
forth
really
between
good.
them, where it's like, no, we're not bad guys, we're desperate, but we're not evil, right? And like Bill Foster saying, I won't cross that line, right? Like it's just it's a great moment for Lawrence Fishburne, and a great performance in that moment. And just like every scene has a nugget like that where it's there for a reason, it's there for a purpose. So I don't know, I personally don't have any problem with the movie except for the one issue of them never saying anything about the fact that Hank goes into the ship, right, and through the quantum tunnel. He's shrinking at this crazy rate to get down into the quantum realm. The quantum tunnel is inside the building. They shrink the building, so now Hank is shrinking inside of a shrunken building, and then that shrunken building is inside the van, which then shrinks.
Whoa.
So there's 3 levels of shrinking going on.
But does it matter when you get down to the quantum realm? Does it matter that anything above it is shrinking?
It doesn't, right? Like I don't, and I think that one of the things of Pym particles is that the whole point is that the objects that are affected exist sort of within their own bubble. That's how he's able to do it, right? And you're not actually shrinking or growing. It's just
not relative. Yeah.
It's actually like it is like it's that your particles are surrounded by these Pym particles, and then the Pym particles are changing your relation to the particles around you, right? So it's like so when you start thinking about it like that, it's like, okay, each one of these is a self-contained ecosystem. And that's how they're all built, right? And even at the beginning when he's in the car and he tries to open the door and Hope goes, it won't open while the system is engaged, right? And it's like, that's because everything within that car is part of that ecosystem, right? So I don't see it as a plot hole at all. It totally vibes with the science of Ant-Man.
They just didn't address it. And I really feel like they needed to say something, right? And obviously it wasn't a problem because the plan was, okay, I'm going to get in the ship, I'm going to start shrinking, and then you're going to shrink the building and you guys are going to get away from everybody else, right? So it was never like, oh no, what happens if we shrink? That was never a problem. Right, there was always a part of the plan, but I just think that it needed to be like, I think Scott just needed to go, wait, but if you shrink inside a shrunken building, won't you shrink so fast that you'll shrink too fast? And like this is hurting my brain just to think about it, right? And for Hank to go, no, each instance is its own relative ecosystem, and so and starts explaining it, and then have Paul Rudd have a third moment where he goes, no, yeah, absolutely, that's what I was thinking the whole time. That's you're right. You're right. I don't know what I was talking about. Yeah.
Right, for have a nice callback to that running gag throughout the movie. But that's my only complaint. That's literally my only complaint with the movie. Everything else about this movie is awesome. And
well, I had a question for you.
Okay.
Why does Bill Foster give the team the information they need in order to find his house?
Because they need Scott. He needs Scott, Ghost, and the lab all in one place.
They need Scott to so they can get
because they need
healing
Scott in
stuff.
order to find Janet.
Jan.
In order
But they didn't know anything about Jan
until Hank shows up.
And that's when Bill decides to give. That's when he makes the decision to give him the information.
Well, I think that he's sort of going like, I need them in order to. If I have them, like I think he's just thinking like, if I have them, I am more likely to be able to accomplish this goal, right? And he's looking at it and he's going like, okay. And as he learns more information, every piece that he learns, he's like, oh, well, now we need Scott because Scott has this connection to Jan. And
right.
So that's going to help us locate her, siphon off the quantum energy and save Ava, right? So like I like that I absolutely had that thought after watching it the first time and sort of watched the second time, and his moment afterwards, and I don't know, I think that there's an element that Foster may have been in the same way that Hank and Hope have been monitoring Scott Lang, that he might have been sort of on that track as well, because she's obviously like Ghost is there at the right moment because they're paying attention to everything else that's happening. So
I guess that's true. Yeah, they've been paying attention.
Like, because he makes a callback, and I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional. I probably need to see the movie a couple more times before I could like sort of make a judgment on this. But I feel like it's a little bit intentional when he says what Cassie says about because Cassie says about Scott and Hank and Hope, it's like, well, have you had contact with them? Well, no, of course not. Why not? Because they hate his guts, right? And then Bill Foster says the same thing later. He goes, it's like why are you sure you haven't been in contact with him? Why are you so sure he's the last person you come to? Well, because we hate each other's guts, right? Like there's a very intentional mirroring there that I don't know if it's just supposed to be another reference to like everybody, like Hank Pym doesn't get along with anyone, or if it was like Bill Foster he's been paying attention the whole time, right? Like, cause he's actively trying to find, this cure for Ava. So I don't know. Like I think that you could take it either way, and either way it works. And I don't see it as a plot hole. It's intended to be one of those situations. Yeah, I don't know. I did have that question, but I looked at it and went, no, this checks out. He's manipulating them at that point and getting them to go where he wants them to. Yeah, that makes sense. I should watch it a second time to see if I can see that moment. Yeah.
But that's cool. You want to dive into some like Easter eggs and stuff?
Yeah. So what would we have missed? What did I miss? Because I'm sure that I missed a lot of references.
Well, you already know that Bill Foster is a superhero from the comics.
Yep.
And he's called Goliath.
Yep.
He grows, of course. Let me see here. Hawkeye also goes by the name Goliath at one point. He also grows. And I had a theory, I mentioned this in the Infinity War Spoilercast, that I wanted to see Hawkeye in this movie. Mm-hmm. New persona, he's running from people, whatever. He falls in with these guys and he becomes a growing superhero as well. But that did not happen. Didn't see Bill Foster grow either, so that's too bad. Ex-Cons is a reference to an actual security company that Scott Lang starts. In the comics, it's called Ant-Man Security Systems.
Okay.
But they call them Ex-Cons, which I think is a great title.
Yeah.
And then, so Ghost in the flashback with Ghost, her father, they name him Elias Starr. And he's a character in the comics called Egghead. He's actually Ant-Man's oldest enemies, going way back to like 1962.
Okay.
And so I don't know if we'll see him again or if that was just kind of a little nod. But but I guess it was said that he and Bill and Hank all worked together. Is that right?
Yeah.
At one point? Yeah.
They were all working at S.H.I.E.L.D., yeah.
Yeah. So that's not consistent with the comics, but it's just cool that he got a little shout out there.
That's cool.
Because Ant-Man doesn't really have a rogues gallery.
Yeah.
Except for Eggman. He's kind of like the guy.
Okay.
So, and let me see what else. So Jimmy Woo, Agent Woo, his character is actually older than Ant-Man. Ant-Man is like the second superhero from the actual Marvel era of comics. Like there's Fantastic Four came out in 1961, and then Ant-Man came out in 1962.
Okay.
But Jimmy Woo goes back to 1956. When before Marvel was even called Marvel, it was back when they were called Atlas Comics, and he's an FBI agent in a comic that dealt with a lot of really awful Asian stereotypes.
Okay.
A Fu Manchu type character.
Yeah.
Communist was plaguing America, and he was an FBI agent that was trying to stop him or something like that. But anyway, he got brought into the Marvel Universe proper, like modern day, and I think he was on S.H.I.E.L.D. at one point, but then he formed another group called Agents of Atlas, and it was called Atlas because he's from Atlas Comics, the Atlas Comics era of Marvel, and all of the characters on his team were characters from Atlas Comics that they had brought into Marvel Universe. So you were saying, what is S.H.I.E.L.D. going to be restructured as?
Yeah.
I would love to see maybe Atlas coming up.
Cool.
Give us, and then I don't think that Wu, the way they portray him here, would be a fit leader for the group since they play him for comedy. But
no, but he could definitely be involved, right? I mean,
for
like,
sure,
you could definitely
absolutely
bring him in. Wouldn't it be great if they made him into the new Coulson, like the because they kind of talk about Avengers 4 being the end of this era, right? Like it'll be everything before and everything after. And so the idea of like, okay, well, we had a Coulson from before and now we have this new Coulson, and it's because Randall Park is great. He's so great in this movie. And
he really is.
Yeah. Just like so many awesome moments for him. He's such a great comedic actor. And he fits in so well with this cast of ridiculous characters.
I loved it when they bust in on him and he's trying to figure out magic.
Yeah. It's like, hey, don't you knock?
Yeah. One of the other moments was there's the great conversation that Scott and Cassie have, where Cassie wants to be his sidekick.
Yep.
And definitely a reference to when Cassie grows up, she actually becomes a superhero herself.
Yep.
And she's in the Young Avengers, and they call her Stature, I think. Yeah, Stature, because she's a growing hero.
And in another 5 years, I can absolutely see them making that movie. I can 100% see that happening with the way that things are going with the MCU. If it continues, and in another 5 or 6 years, when she's the right age to play that character in that role, totally. I can see them going like, you know what, let's do it. Because that would be perfect timing. It wouldn't be the Young Avengers from the comics necessarily. I think that you would want to make some changes, but we've got Captain Marvel coming out, and I think it would be a perfect opportunity for them to go like, here's Miss Marvel, here is Miles Morales Spider-Man, because by that point Tom Holland's Spider-Man will be a little bit older, so you can bring in a young Spider-Man.
And what's Hawkeye's daughter's name? They're basically they're forming that team now, aren't they, in the comics, as the West Coast Avengers? I think they're redoing that with a bunch of kind of the younger guys, and then there's also Wiccan, who is Asgardian. Yeah, and so there's no stretch like we could introduce him fairly easily, and Hulkling, who is a Skrull, I think, maybe.
Yeah, he's a Skrull.
Yeah. Spoilers. Oh no, he's a Kree Skrull hybrid.
Yes.
So if we're being introduced more to the Kree, like the Kree's been in the Marvel universe
Yeah.
from almost the beginning here, but let's bring in some of these other characters.
Yeah.
And I think that we'd have a lot of fun. It's too bad that teams like that would be. It seems like I don't know that they would actually make a big budget movie with them. It's more like let's stick them on Freeform and
like
see
the
how
Runaways.
they do there. Yeah, and Cloak and Dagger.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that they could do it. I do think that they could.
They could do it for sure.
And I think that it would probably do pretty well. I think I don't know. I would love to see them do something like that. I would love to see them be bold and do something. That's how you do something new. Is you go like, okay, well, let's do it with a bunch of teenagers, right?
Yeah, because that's something that they haven't done yet in the movies.
Yeah,
is deal with any sort of superheroes that are under 25 years old.
Yeah. And I mean, if you've got a reborn version of the X-Men coming to the MCU, it's that's a great 1-2 punch of like, here's a bunch of 15-year-olds fighting bad guys.
I think that when this New Mutants movie comes out, I guess they've done it with First Class. So Fox has actually done that quite a bit with their movies.
Yeah.
It's just Marvel proper that hasn't done that yet.
Yeah. Cool. I feel we probably already talked about the post-credits scene as much as I wanted to.
So I don't know about you, but my theater experience, the entire theater, there was like loud gasps and shock and awe. It was the most amazing theater experience, seeing people react to that post-credit scene.
Yeah. I think I had in my 2 experiences. So the first experience was the IMAX opening night, and there's sort of a generally we see a lot of the same people at the theater because everybody, like there's more than one set of dedicated MCU fans out there that's at that opening 7:00 IMAX show on a Thursday every time. And I feel like my first viewing in IMAX, there was a 50-50 split of people going, oh, and people going, and I was in the camp of like, yeah.
Oh, of course.
It wasn't telegraphed, but it was definitely expected that this is the way that they would deal with that because, spoilers, but there's a leaked promo image of the Avengers team in Avengers 4, and now everybody knows Wasp will not be on that team, but Ant-Man is. So sorry.
Yeah, which is too bad.
Yeah, it is too bad, but I think that they logically, in order to make this plot thread work, they had to do it that way.
Yeah.
There's one other thing that I wanted to bring up from the post-credit scene that I think is of note for Avengers 4. Avengers 4 is rumored to be very heavy on time travel, and Janet warns Scott to watch out for she says like temporal wormholes or something like that, or temporal fluctuations or something that like in the quantum realm there are basically like time distortions, and I think that could come into play. I think that's actually a pretty safe bet because we don't have access to Doctor Strange and we don't have the Time Stone. How are we going to harness that time travel power? Well, we've got a jar full of quantum energy. And
whatever that means.
Yeah, and I think that they can just fake science their way through it, right?
Oh, totally.
It'll be the sort of thing of like they pull Scott out of the quantum realm and he's got this jar full of quantum energy, and they're trying to come up with a plan. And it's like, well, if we go back in time or whatever they decide to do, however that comes up, and it's like, well, how are we going to do that? And then Tony Stark turns and goes, you have a jar full of quantum energy, right? It's like, theoretically, if we did this, and then Bruce Banner will be like, yeah, and then we could do this, and then you know how those scenes work.
Oh yes, absolutely.
I could write one of these movies. It's not that hard. Yeah, I think that could be a potential setup. I also think that it's entirely possible, because anything is possible when it comes to Doctor Strange, that although he disappeared at the end of the movie, that he could very well step out of something in the quantum realm and be like, yeah, I'm Doctor Strange.
I was here the whole time.
Yeah, like, because he literally, like, he did his thing where he did his, like, wub, 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 and he's all, like, multi whatever, and while he's meditating, and it's like, at one of those instances of him traveling through to check out all of the ways that this could have happened is, you know, him, like, popping through the quantum realm and being like, oh, you're in here, and if we destroy the time zone out there, it's okay because we can still use this.
Oh,
and, like,
yeah, right. Yeah, because he's seen the outcome already.
Yeah,
he knows.
yeah.
He's the one who knows where Scott Lang is right now.
I would imagine so. If anybody knows exactly where Scott Lang is, it would be Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
And I think that it's entirely possible that he could just pop in and go, look, I can't stick around for a bunch of reasons that are really difficult to explain, but just time travel stuff. Here, go through this, and he just, like, sling rings a portal or whatever, and he's like, and you'll be out. And tell Tony I said blah, right? And then Scott Lang will walk up to him and be like, hey, the last time we saw each other, we were fighting, but I have a message for you. And it'll be something quippy and something mean, and then Tony will know that it's really from Doctor Strange. Man, that is... so they just announced this morning that Avengers Infinity War is coming out on Blu-ray on August 14th, and I cannot wait, because I love their dynamic, and I just want to watch the two Sherlocks get mad at each other and realize that they're more similar than they want to admit. Yeah, I just love it. They both think there's such a great meta narrative there of, like, the two of them being essentially the same character with different superpowers, and, you know, like, but basically the same origin story. And I refusing
and cool facial hair
and genius level intellects and, you know, mimetic memories.
Well, and one of them is like, I solve all my problems through technology. Magic is a little hooey. And the other one's, I solve all my problems through magic. Technology doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
So it's,
I ran out of technology solutions, so I did this other thing. They are basically flip sides of the same coin, right? And yet they hate each other, which really says a lot about who they are as people. And then the meta narrative of the fact that they both played Sherlock in movie. Well, one in a TV series, but a TV series that's more like movies, and then one in a movie series. But they're more alike than they want to admit. I love it. Cool. Well, let's wrap this up with our ranking. Where does Ant-Man and the Wasp sit for you?
Well, it's hard to say when you don't know, like, my entire ranking, but it's gonna be in probably the either the lower top third or higher second third, if that makes sense. It's gonna kind of be right around there, because it's not it's definitely not amongst my favorites, but it wasn't at all a bad movie at all. I quite enjoyed it. So let's see. It'll be the ones that are above it still would include, like, Guardians of the Galaxy 1, the first Avengers, Infinity War, the first Iron Man, Thor Ragnarok.
See, this is what I love so much about these movies, is that we can all agree that they're great and we love them, and yet we can disagree so much on which ones are our favorites.
Yeah.
Because top 5 before Ant-Man and the Wasp, post Infinity War, was and this was right after doing my MCU in review rewatch, where I watched every single movie week after week. Spider-Man: Homecoming at number 1, followed by Iron Man 3, Black Panther, Doctor Strange, Ant-Man in the number 5 spot, and then Infinity War in the number 6 spot, and Thor Ragnarok, and then it goes on and on and on. And definitively, I feel like this Ant-Man is a better Ant-Man than the first Ant-Man. That's my personal feelings on it. And so that means that it bumps Ant-Man into the number 6 spot and is actually in my top 5 right off the bat. So it's funny. It's funny how that can work, but I don't question that, because I loved this movie. I mean, I saw it twice within less than 24 hours. And
wow, really?
That is a prestigious place held only by Star Wars movies. And yet I don't I at no point during my second viewing was I like, ugh, I'm sitting here again. Right. I was fully into it the second time that I saw it, and knowing what was coming was just like, cool. Okay. This is the next part that I'm really going to like. And, I don't know. I from the first time that I watched Ant-Man, I loved Paul Rudd as the character of Scott Lang, and I just thought that they nailed it, and that they got such a great tone, and such a great way of building out the MCU. And the second one just does everything that the first one did, but they do it better. And add
maybe.
in
I mean,
all this extra stuff. So.
I think I still like the heist aspect of the first one better than the second one.
The first one's tighter, right? The first one's a little bit more like down the middle. This one is like, as we talked about, like 5 or 6 intertwining stories. So it's kind of got this circuitous nature to it. But I actually really like that, because I love storytelling like that, where it's, this element over here is affecting this element over here. And everything's kind of coming together. And that's where the conflict comes from. And I just love that aspect that, like you said earlier, there's no villain. This isn't, it really corrects one of the biggest problems with films in the MCU, superhero movies in general. And Spider-Man: Homecoming does it in a different way, and Black Panther does it in a different way, where they take their villain and they add depth, and they actually make the villain more interesting than the hero.
But they're still a villain.
Relatable and understandable, but still they cross the line, right?
Yeah.
But in this one, in Ant-Man and the Wasp, they go the other way of going like, okay, well, if we can't have one great villain, which, like you said, Ant-Man doesn't really have a rogues gallery, so what are you going to do? Well, time is their enemy, right? Greed is their enemy, and I sort of just their hubris is really the biggest nemesis in this story.
And they could have made Ghost into a villain. Yeah. Because
easily.
she was going to, as soon as she kidnapped Cassie, she would have been a villain. But they didn't go that route.
Yeah. And they could have had a classic showdown with the heroes and the villains.
Right.
And they didn't. Like, they have the great chase sequence, but it's a 3-way chase where everybody's just trying to get the MacGuffin.
They're just trying to obtain an object, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I think I just think that they nailed it. So I'm happy to say that it's in my top 5. That's a great update for me to make to that list.
Cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that we've done a pretty thorough job of spoiling this and giving some great behind the scenes stuff. That Agent Wu tidbit, that's what people come to us for. So I'm glad that you delivered on that.
Awesome.
Yeah, because that's awesome. That's such a great. You go out into the world, Thunderquack listeners, and impress your friends with that little. Let's call it a magic trick to keep it tied in with the movie.
Okay, here's another little tidbit. You want to know which character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is older than Agent Wu?
Okay, who?
Groot.
Okay.
Because Groot is... No, actually, you know what? Groot is not. Groot is 1960. Agent Wu is a really, really old character, 1953. Yeah. I think he's the oldest character there. Then
can't top it?
No, I don't think so.
Awesome. Well, I mean, that's such a cool thing that they wove in there, and I don't know that there's too many people that are going to be talking about it, because you are of a dying breed, Kurtis.
Yeah, I know. Got to keep it alive, you know.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I mean, if you want more awesome tidbits like that, I'll tell everybody, go listen to Epic Marvel Podcast, because that's where Kurtis and his co-hosts are dropping some old school Marvel science and really getting into the nitty gritty. Not just old school though, because there's some of them that are a little bit more in the modern age, right? But
we try to keep it pre-2000, so it's going to be pretty classic stuff. And I have an episode coming out about the Defenders coming out next week.
Nice.
But it's not Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, and Daredevil. This Defenders is Doctor Strange, Valkyrie, Gargoyle, Beast, Hulk, and the Son of Satan. So nice. There you go.
What a team.
I know, right?
Awesome. That's it for this episode of the Thunderquack Spoilercast. Thank you guys for joining us. If you want to support Thunderquack, you can do that in two ways. First, by heading to store.thunderquack.com, pick up some cool merch, as well as heading to patreon.com/thunderquack to chip in over there. Patreon is a voluntary monthly subscription service where you chip in what you can to help us, and then we can give you some cool rewards. So if you're watching this on YouTube and it's super inconvenient because you'd much rather be listening to it as an MP3, because there's really not anything to look at on this screen right now, then you can do that by heading over to patreon.com/thunderquack and chipping in $5 a month. You get access to the MP3. You'll also get Epic Marvel Podcast episodes early, the interviews, right?
Yeah, some of them, and I'm putting up some classic, or some ones that I'm not even putting in the original feed.
Awesome.
I'm going to be starting to put up some interviews. I think I got one with Scott Lobdell coming up pretty soon.
Awesome.
That I won't be releasing regular.
Awesome. So yeah, it's a great way to get some exclusive content. You'll also get the exclusive Thunderquack podcast over on Patreon and access to our Facebook group. So do that. Patreon.com/thunderquack, store.thunderquack.com. Is that? Yeah, that's right.
I think so, yeah.
I was questioning myself there for a second. And of course, head to thunderquack.com to check out all the great podcasts in our network, like Epic Marvel Podcast, or if you want to listen to me talk more, Rebel Cells is a great way to do that. But that's it for this Spoilercast. Kurtis, thank you for joining me, and thanks
Pleasure
everybody.
As always.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.
See ya.